Image family, how you doing? Good morning. Good morning. Welcome. If you're a guest with us, we're so glad that you're here. We'd love for you to check out our first-time guest tent. It's out front. We got a cool gift for you that we'd love to give you just to say thank you for being here this morning and being a guest with us and choosing to worship here. Listen, we're in a series called Compelled where we're looking at the power of loving your neighbor. It's this whole idea. We're in the year of transformation, and we've been looking at transformation to us should lead to transformation through us. And so that's what we've been walking through over the past several weeks, and we're going to continue today. And so if you have your Bibles, I'd love to invite you to join me in Luke chapter 10. By the way, if you don't have a Bible, we've got one for you at our Connection Center out there. We would love to give you. It's our gift to you. We would love to be able to hand that to you. So just stop by on your way out. For those of you that may be new to Christianity, the Bible is divided into two parts. You have the Old Testament and the New. We're going to be in the New Testament this morning and an account written by Luke, who was a doctor, a physician. I kind of feel like I jive with him a little bit because I always wanted to be a heart surgeon as a kid. Turns out I am, just a different kind, okay? So I love Luke, always loved him. He's one of Jesus' 12 disciples, and we're going to be picking up in his gospel account. So Matthew, Mark, Luke is where we're going to be this morning. And as you're turning there, let me ask you this question. How many of you have heard of the name Fred Rogers? Raise your hand. Fred Rogers, and he's not a baseball player, okay? That's a hint. Fred Rogers. I remember Fred Rogers, because he launched a program on February 19th, 1968 called Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Y'all remember this? Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. As a kid, I got in front of my TV. It was granular and grainy and very small, and it was actual cable, not streamed in, and we would watch Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. And what's interesting is that on February 19th, 1968, when this show aired for the very first time, nobody knew the profound impact that it would have literally on the region, the nation, because what Fred Rogers would do would be different than anybody had ever done before on national television. What Fred Rogers would do was redefine fundamentally what it means to be a neighbor. And y'all remember the little jingle that went toward the song, "It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood." Sing it with me, you know. A beautiful day for a neighbor. Would you be mine? Could you be mine? Please won't you be my neighbor? And one of the things that we saw from Fred is his disposition toward the people that were in his community was different. And his disposition toward the watcher was different. As he sung that jingle, as he sung that song, he was looking at you and me, the viewers. He was looking at people beyond his local community and the way that he interacted in his community and the way that he projected and asked for us to interact in our communities was different. And on that day that it launched, it really would functionally and foundationally change this idea of what it means to be a neighbor as he redefined it for the world. We're going to pick up in Luke chapter 10, verse 25, where we're going to see Jesus defining neighbor. We're going to see Jesus defining neighbor, and we're going to look at this definition that Jesus gives to a question that many of us have probably asked in our life or have wondered or are curious of. What does it mean to actually be a neighbor? Who is my neighbor? This is what Jesus is going to unpack, and he is foundationally going to redefine it forever for many of us, and that's what we're going to look at today in Luke chapter 10, verse 25. Pick up with me as I read. It says this: "Then an expert of the law stood up to test him, saying, 'Teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?'" So real quick, a little bit of context. You've got these religious leaders, experts of the law, that are gathered around Jesus. This was pretty typical. And what they would do is they'd kind of play 21 questions. They'd grab him and they'd want to ask him all these questions to sort of get him in a debate or try to derail him or try to accuse him of something or debunk his ability, all that kind of stuff. And so they'd gather around him and they'd ask him these questions. And they'd already been doing this. There's been a pattern of this. But in chapter 10, we get a different expert of the law. He comes up and he says, "Listen, what do I have to do to inherit eternal life?" Now, here's the thing. You've got to understand in the text, it says he stood up to test him. To test him. This is going to help frame out a little bit of our context. This guy's not genuinely curious. He doesn't actually want to know the answer. He wants to test Jesus, the Savior of the world. Now, this is a common theme for religious leaders. They wanted to try to test him and reveal that he's some kind of fraud. And so Jesus responds in verse 26, classic Jesus moment. He responds with a question. By the way, Christians, we can take note in this. Oftentimes, some of the best answers to the questions we get is by responding with a question. Jesus does that in verse 26. "What is written in the law?" he asked him. "How do you read it?" Now, I bet the religious elite guy wasn't expecting to hear this, by the way. But this would have been in his wheelhouse. He would have known. And so he gets juked a little bit, but he steps to the table. Verse 27, he answered, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all of your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." And Jesus says in verse 28, "You've answered correctly. Do this, and you will live." So what we see is this religious leader He gets the right answer. It's like, ding, 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 we have a winner. This guy got the answer right. And the religious leader responds to Jesus when he asks, what does the law say and how do you read it? He quotes from Leviticus 19, verse 18, and Deuteronomy 6, 5. This guy knows the answers. Again, this would have been in his wheelhouse. He knows the scriptures backwards and forward. He recites this off the cuff. He doesn't say, hold on, let me pull out my iPhone and Google it really quick, right? He didn't pull out the scroll and open it up. He just says, here it is. Here's the answer. He knows it. And Jesus actually affirms the answer that the guy gives. But listen, here's the thing that we have to understand in this. Just because you have the right answer to a question doesn't mean that you have the right understanding of the answer that you just gave. One of the things that we have to understand is that it's more than just knowing the right answers. It's more than just knowing the facts. It's another thing to have understanding of the facts that you're saying. Right understanding involves both right answers and right understanding to where you actually apply it in your life, to where it leads to life change. In other words, facts don't produce facts don't produce fruit, only faith produces fruit. Facts don't produce fruit, only faith produces fruit. And facts are great, but they don't produce any kind of fruit in your life. In my backyard, we bought this during COVID, but I've got one of those big trampolines. My parents gave me a gift card to Walmart, and so we were like, let's do this thing. We're gonna get a trampoline, and just be like, this backyard just looks, trampoline in the backyard. But we got this trampoline, and I was researching all the different trampolines. Believe it or not, there's a lot of manufacturers, a lot of ones you have no clue what they are, and there's like 2 reviews or whatever. But the big thing that I wanted was one that could hold a lot of weight, because I'm like, I want the whole fam to be able to jump on this thing. We want to be able to do this together if we're going to do it. And so I found this trampoline, and it said that it holds up to 700 pounds. And so I got it, and Walmart gift card, and here we go. And so trampoline in our backyard. Now, if you came over to my house and saw the trampoline, I could sit there and I could tell you, listen, here's the deal. This trampoline, I researched the mess out of it. If you know anything about me, I'm a researcher, and I'm like, I'm going to buy the best product, and I'm going to get the best bang for my buck. So, man, I researched the mess out of this thing. It holds up to 700 pounds. You, me, the whole family, all of us can get on this thing and jump on it, and it's going to be okay. And I can talk to you about how I put it together, and I know all the parts. I know how many parts there were to it as I assembled that entire thing. But at the end of the day, you're kind of going to look at me and be like, bro, it's cool that you bought the best trampoline, but I've yet to see you jump on that trampoline. See, what happens is the fruit of my faith in that trampoline happens when I climb up on that thing and I start bouncing like crazy, and you're like, all right, this dude gets it. He really believes in the product that he purchased. See, the fruit of my faith in that trampoline is demonstrated by my actions and activity of actually climbing on the trampoline and jumping on it. Facts don't produce fruit. Faith produces fruit. And one of the biggest problems when it comes to professing Christians in our culture, especially those that grew up around the church, is that we know the right things to say. We've heard them since we were 2. We know the right facts. We know the right answers. We grew up around them, but there's an inconsistency in our lives between what we say and how we live. And we're leaning into facts, but they're not producing any fruit, and there's a gap. We don't understand the implications of the facts that we know to be true. Y'all, this religious leader, he knows the right things to say, but he doesn't understand the impact and implications that those things should have on his life. There's a disconnect. And we're about to see that disconnect next in verse 29. Here is his response back. Remember, Jesus says, you answered correctly. We have a winner. Do this and you will live. And he says in verse 29, but wanting to justify himself, he asked Jesus, and who is my neighbor? Now, this is what I love about the Bible and the text that gives us such insight into what's going on here. We get a glimpse into this guy's heart. We get to zoom in on this guy's heart, because we see that the disconnect here is that the religious leader is seeking to justify himself. Luke writes this intentionally so we know this guy is seeking to justify himself. In other words, there is a self-centered perspective that we see here. There's a self-centered perspective that we see here. Again, this is not a question that's rooted in legitimate curiosity or ignorance of like, I actually don't know who my neighbor is. That's not why he's asking the question. This is a question rooted in the desire to justify himself and his efforts. See, for him, it's all about self-image, appearance, self-preservation, and he wants Jesus to give this kind of baseline definition that he could use to support his own view of himself. He wants Jesus to come out and be like, oh, your neighbor is this person that lives within this man. He's like, I've done that. I'm good, right? He wanted to justify himself. For him, listen, this is transactional. This is like a list of things, and it's one of the things on the list, and he can check it off, and he can justify himself. The religious leader has a heart issue. A heart issue. And that's what Luke shows us when we zoom in and we look, that he was trying to justify himself. This is not about self-justification. It's not about outward appearance. This is about a new heart position rooted in God's love that changes the way that you view and love and engage your neighbor. In fact, we're going to see that from what Jesus does next, the way he answers. Jesus is not going to give a baseline definition. He's going to answer him by holding up a new perspective. He's not going to come out and say, here's the baseline definition. He's going to hold up a radical new perspective. Y'all, here's the thing. The fruit that is consistent with Scripture will always come as a result of seeing and embracing God's love for you. There is a perspective shift that happens when you become a Christian. And it comes through that changed heart, that new life that you experience. This is what Jesus is getting after. He wants us to have a new perspective. So verse 30, we pick up. And I love this. Watch how Luke records this. He says, Jesus took up the question and said. I love it. Jesus took up the question. And he says this. He tells a parable. A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell into the hands of robbers. They stripped him, beat him up, and fled, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the road. When he saw him, he passed by on the other side. In the same way, a Levite, when he arrived at the place, saw him and passed by on the other side. Pause for just a minute. I want to give you a little bit of context so you understand the gravity of how this is landing with the religious elite that's asking this question. You've got a guy that's been beat to a pulp that's lying dead on the side of the road. Two guys walk by, a priest and a Levite. Now, you got to understand, these two guys would have sort of been in the same camp as this religious elite that's asking the question. He would have been able to jive with them. He's like, yeah, I know those. I know that crew. I know those people. I got that. Jesus is being very intentional to do that, by the way. He wants this guy to connect with them. And both of these guys, they excuse themselves from helping this dying man on the side of the road. Now, we don't have an answer. This is interesting, but we don't have an answer why, but it seems that the goal is to show that they have no excuse. So we don't get a reason. Luke doesn't say, and here's why they passed by on the other side. Well, the point is they were without excuse. There's no reason why they should have done this, and yet they did. And now, after these two characters that Jesus has brought in, that this guy would have really connected with, that walked on the opposite side of the road, Jesus is about to introduce a new character. A new character that they also would have known, but they would have not liked whatsoever. There's going to be another guy that comes in, and he's going to be known as the Samaritan. And the Samaritans were absolutely hated by the Jews. They couldn't stand them. There was a massive racial divide that existed. There was all kinds of barriers that were there that were put in place. They could not stand Samaritans. This would have shocked the religious leader and everybody listening. The simple fact that Jesus says the word and there was a Samaritan would have been like, what is going on? They would have been shook when Jesus mentioned this guy's name. The only way I could try to paint this picture is it would be like if we were given the illustration, it was like there's a dying man on the side of the road and a pastor walked by and he did nothing. And then a Chick-fil-A employee walked by, which is kind of like a pastor, right? And then you had this criminal that walks by. And the criminal steps in. We'd be like, hold up, what? I mean, a pastor and a Chick-fil-A guy? Pastor, I get. Chick-fil-A guy? No way. It's his pleasure. You know, like he would step over and do it. There's no way he would abandon that specific person on the side of the road. We'd be like, what's going on? This is what Jesus is trying to do. He's trying to shake this up, get their attention. He's doing something very specific here. Because what Jesus is communicating is that what he's about to show, it goes beyond preference. It goes beyond ethnicity. It goes beyond people groups. It goes beyond being affiliated with a religion. What Jesus is after is a perspective shift. A perspective shift. And so verse 33, Jesus continues, but a Samaritan on his journey came up to him, talk about the dying man on the road. And when he saw this man, he had compassion. Underline that word, very important word. Verse 34. He went over to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring olive oil and wine. Then he put him on his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper and said, take care of him. When I come back, I'll reimburse you for whatever extra you spend. Verse 36, Jesus looks at the man and he says, which of these 3 do you think proved to be a neighbor to this man who fell into the hands of the robbers? Verse 37, the guy responds, he says, the one who showed mercy to him. And Jesus says, go and do the same. Go and do the same. See, here's what Jesus does. Jesus takes this leader's question, this religious elite who comes over and asks him a question, and he doesn't answer him with a theological definition, but with a life situation. And what he does is he flips the religious leader's question on its head. The religious leaders wanted to justify himself by saying, who is my neighbor? Give me the transactional list so I can check it off the mark. And what Jesus does is he takes this opportunity to show what it means to actually be neighborly. In other words, Jesus basically says, stop asking who is my neighbor and start asking, what kind of person am I? What kind of person am I? What we have to see here, y'all, off the jump, is that Christianity isn't about a set of rules that we follow. It's about a new perspective that we live by. It's not a transactional list. It's about transformational change that happens at the core of who we are. And here's the point. The point of the parable is not to help you better identify your neighbor. The point is to teach you what it means to be neighborly. Don't miss that. The point of this parable is not to help you better identify your neighbor. It's not a playbook for like, here's who your neighbor is and here's who it isn't, and let me walk through this. The point of the parable is to teach you what it means to be an actual neighbor. Think about it like this. If you were searching on YouTube, right, that's the place we go to figure things out, and you're like, I want to know what a foreman of a construction company is. And so you see this video and you click on it, and it says, what is a foreman to a construction company? And you click on it, you start watching, and you start hearing about what a foreman actually is. And before you know it, 2 or 3 minutes in, it's kind of like these, clickbait deals. All of a sudden, you're drawn in, and they're like teaching you what it means to be a foreman. And you can't stop watching. You're like, man, this is fascinating. And okay, this is what it means. And so you watch this thing for 45 minutes. And at the end of it, they're like, and we also are going to offer you a certificate now, so you can go and use this on your job application because you now could apply to be a foreman. You've been trained and ready. You walk away and you're like, bro, this is amazing. Like, I have learned so much about structures and building and code and how things work and how things go. And you walk out and you're proud you got this certificate. And what started with a question on what is a foreman now led to you being trained as one. And you walk out and all of a sudden now, whether you like it or not, you have a totally different perspective. Every building that you walk in, you're like, yeah, I shouldn't have gone there. Why do they do that? I feel like that corner wasn't quite added up. It wasn't quite lined up this way. When I watched my video, I learned and I saw that this is actually how it goes. And you would foundationally have a different perspective every time that you walk into a building because of what you had experienced. You would have a perspective shift. This is what Jesus has just done with the people around him. He wants them to have a perspective shift. He wants them to see that loving others, loving your neighbor, it is a foundational expression of what it means to have a new identity in Christ. This is what Jesus wants. So here's the question. What does that look like, though? What does that look like, though? How do we start to bring this down? What does it look like to be neighborly? If that's our call to be neighborly, what does that look like in light of what Jesus teaches in this passage? That's where we want to head next. For starters, what Jesus is getting at when it talks about being neighborly is something that we've got to begin to understand is a natural disposition that we have for those that are around us. This is where we have to start. That it's a natural disposition that we have for the people around us as Christians. This is a disposition of compassion. This is a disposition of being willing to help people that are in need. This is as we go throughout everyday life, we have a different lens and a different perspective in which we see people and problems, and we're willing to, and we're bent toward stepping in and helping people in those positions of need. It's about showing compassion to the people around us, and it's rooted in and founded in the gospel. Y'all, listen, when you become a Christian, you have a new heart, and you get a new perspective, and that new perspective is like what we call around here gospel glasses that you put on. So you see the world differently. You see problems differently. You see people differently. And so if you're actually a Christian, then the Holy Spirit inside of you that you receive and you believe functionally changes your view of the world. So what we have to do is ask the question, if we don't have a disposition of compassion toward other people, have we actually encountered the living God? Have we actually surrendered our lives to Christ? Because we don't have that perspective. And maybe that's you, and the answer this morning is not trying to tweak a perspective, but it's surrendering to the person of Christ. Maybe you need to start by seeing him for who he is. But as a Christian, we have a new perspective. It is the gospel that's the means and the motivation for living with compassion, this disposition toward other people where we're bent toward helping people in need, showing mercy, showing compassion, meeting the needs of the people around us. Now, one of the things that I think is important for us to talk about and understand is the difference between gospel compassion and societal charity, right? Like, what is the difference between how society views compassion and how the Christian should view compassion? Right? Because if we can get at the core of this, I think we can actually move in a specific direction that we need to move in. So let's understand kind of the perspective of society, because if we're not careful, it's easy to be like, well, everybody's just kind of, and I could plug into this and plug into that. Here's what we have to understand. So society's motivation, it is always moral. They're motivated by morality. It is the moral thing to do. And that makes sense, because Romans 1 tells us that we all know right and wrong. We all have a set principle of morality that God has instilled in all of humanity. And so we have this understanding of right and wrong. We know good and we know evil. On some level, every person's born with that cognitive understanding. So there's an effort in society to embrace that to some degree by doing nice things for people, by showing compassion to people, by doing good things. Right? And oftentimes those good things, they're motivated by the goodwill of humanity. Sometimes it's motivated by guilt. Sometimes it's motivated by a sense of like human duty. Sometimes it's motivated by tax benefits. Sometimes it's motivated by optics or how you want to be viewed or the mark you want to leave on the world. Sometimes it's motivated by a lot of different things. And there's people that do a whole lot of good based on a whole lot of different motivations that are ultimately rooted in some sort of moral sense. But there's a difference in that and what it means to show biblical compassion. And the main difference between Christian compassion and societal compassion is the motivation. See, Christian compassion is radical. It's a holistic perspective shift, and it's motivated by the gospel, not morality. It's motivated by the gospel, and it involves sacrifice. See, when we look at this religious leader, what we see is his motivation is morality. How do I appear to other people? But what Jesus is getting at is it's not about how you appear to other people. It's about a perspective shift. Being motivated by something different, it's how that perspective shift happens in your life. See, gospel motivation is different. It's different from any kind of societal motivation. You're like, how? Well, here's how. Because it's rooted in the perspective that you were exactly like this dead man laying on the side of the road, but worse. You were actually dead. He was almost dead. You were actually dead spiritually. And Jesus came to you when you didn't deserve it. And he did what you could never do for yourself. And he didn't just pour oil and wine on your wounds. He poured out his blood for you. And he didn't just bandage you up. He brought you to new life. He didn't just give you a temporary place that you could recover in. He gave you an eternal dwelling place in heaven with him for all of eternity. Jesus stepped in to do for you what you could never do for yourself. And when you understand the gospel at a foundational level, you realize that you were exactly like the man laying on the side of the road. And Jesus stepped in for you and showed you compassion to the greatest degree. He had mercy on you to the greatest degree. And when you see that kind of compassion, it changes everything. It changes everything. It has to. You can't actually encounter that type of compassion and walk away unchanged. When you understand the compassion that Christ has showed you, it changes everything. Which means this, we can't show true compassion to other people until we first experience the compassion that's been aimed at us through Christ. Y'all, this is why we say here over and over and over again that the gospel is not just the start of the Christian life, but it's the essence of the Christian life. We never get past the gospel. We never get past the gospel because our motivation to be people of compassion is rooted in looking at the compassion that's been given to us. Our ability to actually walk in compassion toward other people is rooted in the new life that we've experienced through Christ. We have the ability, we have the lens, the means, the method, all of that because of Jesus. And so he's the one that we look to over and over and over again. We never get past the gospel. When you encounter Jesus, when you see the compassion that he's extended to you, it changes everything. Everything. And it starts with your perception of the world. So let's talk about what these changes begin to look like. First, it means that we actually, to love others well, we actually have to have eyes to see them. It starts with having eyes to see them. So as we work through this and we understand what Jesus is doing, what we're seeing, we have to have eyes to actually see them. The Samaritan saw this man differently than the other two guys that walked by. The text says that he saw him and had compassion. I told you that was an important word. Had compassion on him. So the question that we have to ask ourselves is, do we have eyes to see people with compassion? Or do we have eyes to see people with judgment? Because oftentimes what we do in our culture is we see someone in need and we feel sorry for them or we judge them. That's not what the Samaritan does. He didn't know how this guy ended up like that, but he had compassion on him. He saw him differently. Part of this perspective shift is that we see people differently. Do you have the ability to see injustices and have compassion and take steps of action? The Samaritan saw that an injustice had happened and he stepped in and showed him compassion and mercy. Do we have the ability to see when somebody's wronged and they need help? When something happens and they need somebody to step in, do we have eyes to see that? Can we step back and look at society through that perspective? And when we see people in need and we understand their problem, are we people that just put a Band-Aid on it, or do we work toward a viable solution for flourishing? Because what we see from this man is that he works beyond putting a Band-Aid on it. So often what happens is in our culture and even in the church is when we think about showing compassion to other people, we think about like a project or a one-off or just a good action. What we see here is something way bigger than just random acts of kindness. This is like an aim focus at like this man was dead on the side of the road and I want to see him rehabilitated and back to flourishing again. Like there's this desire to walk with this man, to help this man get to a place where he's no longer laying on the side of the road. Is that how we view problems in our culture? Is that how we lean into the local church? Y'all listen, the church is to be the vehicle that helps do that. We're to be the hands and feet of Jesus. When you look at this guy though, here's what you see. There's 6 acts of compassion. There's 6 acts of compassion that he does toward this man laying on the side of the road. And I just want to hold him up for you because I want you to see what it cost this man and what this looked like. Because remember, Jesus says, go and do the same. So we've got to kind of understand what the Samaritan did to the greatest degree. So here are the 6 acts that he does. The Samaritan first goes to him. So he approaches him. Then he bandages his wounds. Then he pours oil and wine on his wounds. So notice these are out of his own resources. His own saddlebag. You know what I'm saying? He pulled him out. Then he puts him on his own animal. So now he's walking and this guy's riding, okay? He takes him to an inn and he provides additional care. Then he tells the innkeeper he'll settle additional accounts on the way back. So now he takes his money. And he says, listen, I'm willing to give it toward this man and his recovery. What we see in this is as we have eyes to see and as we identify, and as we see the need for compassion, as we see the need to step in and help others, that it involves sacrifice. It's not just charitable acts of one-time service, but it involves sacrifice and saying we actually want to step in. Being a neighbor is going to be sacrificial. I need you to hear that. I would love to say it's going to be easy. It's going to be great. It's going to be sacrificial. Because at the end of the day, when you look at the cross, it was sacrificial. And we reenact that when we love our neighbors well. C.S. Lewis says the only safe rule when it comes to giving is to give more than you think you can spare until it pains you. When you begin to feel the burdens of others, you start to get where you need to be. When you begin to experience the inconvenience and even the difficulty. This is what it means to show compassion. This is what we see here. Again, Jesus said this, go and do like this. And so we look at the man and we say, man, it involved a lot. It involves a lot. Quote from one of my mentors, he says this, believers in a church, in the church face a particular temptation. Like this priest and Levite, we're all into our religious duties, but when you look at our lives, there's very little giving of ourselves. And it's just true. And it's hard. It's easy to get caught up in everyday life, not have eyes to see. And then if we do see, it's kind of a let me do the easiest way out. Let me kind of do the one time. I don't want it to sacrifice. I don't want it to cost me anything. And Jesus is saying it's going to cost you. Now, I know for some of you, you're thinking, all right, bro, it's a big ask. Like anybody in need, How do we do this? How do we give us some like boundaries or guardrails? How do we do this thing? Well, a scholar at one point, he wrote a book called The Duty of Charity, and he shared some of these excuses that we tend to come up with and then provided answers. And so I want to hold this up for you. I think they're very admirable and commendable. I think he's right on point, and they're things that we often wrestle with. The first excuse when it comes to actually serving and showing compassion and meeting the needs around us is this. Excuse number one, we only help people when they're in dire need. And his answer is, and you're asking the question, do we only help people in dire need? And the answer is, that violates the principle of loving our neighbor as ourselves. We come to our own aid long before the situation of dire need. Long before. So I think it's a valid point to go, wait a minute, we don't just help people that are in dire need. That's not the way that we love ourselves. Excuse number two, he says, but what about the people that bring trouble on themselves? We don't help the people that bring trouble on themselves. The answer is, but Christ revealed the misery that you brought on yourself. Should we not love others as Christ loved us? Man, like there's no escape in this, like we want to find an out. But the reality is that when we look at what Jesus has done for us, there is no excuse. There's no excuse for not being people that have a disposition of compassion, that are willing to get in the trenches and help people that are in need, to show mercy and kindness to people that have problems or situations that they're walking through. Now, I know for some of you, you want to flip to the other side. You're like, okay, listen, well, can you give me a list? Like, can we at least just have a framework of a list of things that we can do? And what we do is, and this is a pitfall, we reduce loving our neighbor down to this checklist of things to do. Here's the problem. Jesus didn't give us a checklist. And I think the reason behind that is that checklists don't motivate anybody. And you see this often with Jesus. He leaves us in the ambiguity to wrestle with, do we actually believe what we say we believe? Here's the problem. If we did have a list, we'd fail it like crazy. And you know what would happen? We'd become unmotivated. We'd be like, I just can't do this anymore. I feel discouraged. I feel defeated. Like, this is just too much. This is more than what I can handle. This is not about a list that we need to follow or adhere to. This is about cultivating a new heart around Christ, seeing the compassion that he's given us and giving that to others. Jesus didn't give us a list for a reason, because he's after a perspective. He's after a perspective for us, a disposition of compassion. So here's a fair question, though. Where do we start in this? Where do we start in this? Because I know for some of you, what happens is when we get here, you have a paralysis of analysis. And it's like, man, there's so many things I could do and so many needs around me. Like, how do I even, give me at least a place to start in this. I understand we can't have a checklist, but where do we start? Well, let me walk you through 3 places that you can start. Number one is, for many of us, if not all of us, we've got to start by identifying the idols that are keeping us from having a disposition of compassion toward other people. What are the things that are holding us back from being people of compassion, from stepping in and meeting needs, from getting in the trenches? Is it our career? Are we too busy? Do we have no margin? Are we stingy with our money? Is it our families? I mean, listen, we're professionals at taking good things and making them God things. Like, God gives us good gifts and we just hold on to that thing and it shapes and defines our lives more than God does. And that's an idol. What are the idols that are keeping you from getting in the trenches with other people, from having a disposition of compassion? Listen, for some of you, it's the fact that you view Christianity as a thing and not the thing that shapes your life. For many of us, it's like Christianity is kind of over here, Sundays when I can, some other things when I can, maybe a random act of kindness, and it's like career, life, family, all over here. That is the opposite. That is the opposite of what we see when we look at biblical Christianity. When we look at biblical Christianity, and we've talked about this before, it's not like Jesus is number one on the priorities of your life. He's the actual paper that you write all of your priorities on. You feel me? Like, it's a radical perspective shift. He shapes everything that you do. How you treat others, how you work your job, how you love your family, how you position your priorities. He shapes all of it. And for some of us, we've got to ask the question, what are the idols holding us back? What are the things that are keeping us? Why aren't we more compassionate? I feel like a lot of times God kind of makes me eat the sermon that I'm going to preach that week. Like, it never fails. Like I'm working on a text and God's like, here you go, take this and chew on that for a little bit and actually do it in your own life. And often, more times than I can count. I got a text, I kid you not, this past week from one of my neighbors. And she was in a very unique situation. Her mom was terminally ill, and she basically sends me a text and says, hey, will you mow my yard? And I wasn't actually will. It's like, can you mow my yard? And, inside of me, I'm kind of like, oh, gosh, I got, so much going on. I got my own yard. I've got my kids, my family. They're out of school. Like, this is chaotic. What do we do? And I kind of wrestle with it. And, 2 days later, I told her, I said, hey, don't worry about it. I'll take care of it. But, keep me posted on your mom. And, if I'm honest, my heart was not in a great place. I'm like, I just don't know, And then she sends me a text 2 days later, and she says, my mom just died. And I was like, man, how could I not? Like, the least I can do is for her to come home with a decent looking yard, And so I'm like, okay, I've got to figure out when I'm going to do this. And it turns out the only time I had available was Saturday during the day, in between the rain. Y'all know it rained all weekend. And I'm out there, I get my mower and I go over and it's just kind of processing as I'm mowing the grass. And I'm sitting there, my family's inside, my kids are inside. I'm taking time for my family to do this thing. And I started to reflect on the text that I was going to be preaching this weekend and the call to have compassion to those in need. And I started thinking, you know what? I hate the fact that I'm not inside with my family, but I love the fact that my family gets to watch me model compassion for somebody that's in need. And I started to wrestle with the reality that oftentimes, or even sometimes in our life, we have to say no to good and godly things in order to say yes to even more godly things, to model for our families what it means to show compassion, what it means to step in care. The family is a great thing, but if we're not careful, we'll take the family and we'll make it the ultimate thing. And Francis Chan talks about this when he talks about the idolization of the family. And he talks about how most families are known for sitting around casually on a Sunday afternoon, just relaxing, enjoying time together. And he's like, is that really what you want your family to be known for? Is every time you get together, you just relax and do nothing? Or do you want to equip your family to be an army that's mobilized for God's kingdom? And if we're going to do that, then sometimes it means saying no to things like your family, to say yes to something godly and biblical. So in the process, you model for your family what it means to be Christ-like, to be able to have a conversation. And y'all, if we're not careful, what happens is we fall prey to the idols of our life, and we turn around and we look, and we've given it all away for all these other things except for the things that actually matter. Let me prove it to you. Almost everybody in here at some point has said no to their families in order to say yes to their job, and overworking, doing things that the job is extending you on that you actually don't have to do, but you'll say yes to that to earn $1, but you won't say yes to your neighbor who's in need. There's a disconnect, and there's an idolatry that exists there. And this is why over and over and over again, we've got to be people of the word. We're looking at the word saying, God, examine our hearts, show us the idols that exist, because we don't want to live for the temporary. We want to live for the eternal. It starts with understanding the idols. Let me ask you, when is the last time you've said no to a good thing in order to say yes to a godly thing that ultimately models for your family the one thing that you want of them the most, which is for them to know and love Jesus? And it's hard. And I'll tell you, I don't do it perfectly. There's tons of times I screw it up. I told you one good time I kind of got it right. My heart was still in a weird place. But it's messy and it's hard. But when you begin to have those back-end conversations and see the fruit that come through it, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. So it starts with identifying the idols in your life that are holding you back from being a person of compassion. Secondly, it involves plugging into the local church. I can't stress this enough. We are local church people here, but man, it matters. The church is the place that helps you, that centers your heart around the compassion of Jesus. Y'all listen, we gather here every week. You know why? Not to check a box, not to be religious, but to be reminded of the person and work of Jesus. And so when you commit to being involved in the local church, you're putting yourself in position to week after week after week have the gospel recited over your life to remind you of the idols that we just talked about, and yet at the same time remind you of the goodness of Christ. You need the local church. Nobody's saved into isolation. Nobody's saved onto an island, and you will find yourself losing motivation, losing gumption if you don't have people around you. Like, plugging into the local church is essential to growing as a Christian. Growing in Christ is a group project. You see it over and over and over again. And for some of you, it's like, man, I'm not a person of compassion. And it's like, I don't know, look at your calendar. If you can't prioritize being at the gathering, you're not going to prioritize serving your neighbor. You're not even going to be reminded of it. You're not going to be challenged of it or encouraged to be able to do that in any capacity. plugging into the local church is essential in keeping your heart oriented around the compassion of Jesus. Because here's what we know. When our hearts are centered around the compassion of Jesus, the compassion of Jesus can't help but flow through us. And that's what we want to be true of our lives. The other thing is that the church is also the place that God's called to identify the needs in our community. So if you're like, man, I just don't know, what are some ways that I can help people? Listen, I could give you a slew of lists of ways that we can help people in our community. We talk about them all the time. There's plenty of other ones. We just need people to step up and say, hey, I'm interested. I'm willing to help. I'm willing to serve. I'm willing to give of my time to actually get in the trenches and walk with some people to help see restoration happen. There are so many needs that the church has identified that we want to help you get connected to. So not only is it a place to remind you of the compassion of Christ, it's a place to mobilize you to be compassionate in light of Christ. And thirdly is this: devoting yourself to the word and prayer. Devoting yourself to the word and prayer. See, here's what's so important about the word and prayer. You know what both of those things do? They keep you oriented around the compassion of Jesus. When you open up the Word of God, what you will see is the person and work of God revealed through Christ. And over and over and over again, you will see how you were a wretched sinner, and yet God has lavished you with His grace through the finished work of Jesus. And you will see that though your sin was great, that His grace was greater. And when you open His Word, what you'll see is just how bad off you were, but how great He's made you to be. And you'll see that even in the gaps when you screw up and you don't show compassion and you ignore the needs of other people, that there's a God that doesn't view you based off your activity, but views you based off of Christ. And you open up that word, and over and over and over again, you're saturated with the goodness of God, the compassion of God that has been poured out to you. Jesus hanging on the cross, blood running down it, suffocating to death, saying, I love you. You were dead on the side of the road. I love you. I'm here for you. And I don't just pick you up and revive you. I bring you back to new life. When you open up God's word, it does that. When you find yourself being a person of prayer, what are you doing? God, help me be to others as you've been to me. God, the same compassion that you have showed me, give me eyes to see, give me ears to hear. Shape my heart. God, break the idols down in me. God, help me not to walk in fear, but help me to walk in faith. Help me to trust that when I actually do what you've called me to do, that you will be faithful. And yes, will it mean sacrifice and service? Yes, it'll mean those things. But I'm trusting that you're going to be true to your word and you're going to see me through it. When we're devoted to time in the word and prayer, it can't help but. These are the tools that God's given us to orient us around the compassion that He's shown us. And the more that you see the compassion to us, guess what? The more that His compassion flows through us. And y'all listen, this doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen. You're not going to walk out of here and do it perfectly tomorrow. You never will. In fact, good luck. The point is that we fix our eyes on Jesus and He continues to transform our lives. There's a word for that. It's a big Christian word called sanctification. And all it means is the change that the gospel brings in you. And over time, as you keep your eyes fixed on Jesus, time in the Word, prayer, connected to a local church, asking the right questions, that over time, what you'll begin to see is a transformed life. That you will begin to have eyes to see, you will begin to have ears to hear, and you will begin to see your neighbor differently. And God will do a work in you. And so those are the things that I want you to consider this morning as we look at Jesus' call to us. I want you to consider these three things this morning: identifying the idols that are hindering you from being a person of active compassion toward others. I want you to consider devoting yourself to the local church and committing yourself to the word and prayer. I want you to consider those things in your own life. What Jesus shows us is that compassion toward others, neighborly love toward others, is about a perspective shift that only He can bring. And for some of you this morning, you've never encountered the compassion of Jesus. You've never experienced the gospel in your own life. And where you need to start is not anything else other than saying, Jesus, I surrender. I surrender all. Sin had left a crimson stain, but you washed me white as snow. And this morning, it's just open hands and a sincere heart that says, Jesus, I want to experience your compassion. I've never experienced your compassion before in my life. If you're not a Christian and you're here, that's the starting line for you. And I want to encourage you to see the compassion of Jesus. that he demonstrated his love for you in this, that while you were still a sinner, he died for you. He died for you. For some of you, you need to receive that compassion this morning. For those of you that are Christians, would you see the compassion of Jesus? Would you not get past your own story? What you've been saved from, who you've been saved to. Don't listen to me. And Paul does this often. I'm going to do it to you. Don't lose your awe in the gospel. Don't lose your awe in the gospel. It's the awe in the gospel that keeps us motivated, because in that you see the compassion of Christ. And this morning, for some of you, you've got to come to the altar and you've got to, with outstretched hands, say, God, I've missed the awe of the gospel. For others of you, it's, God, give me a heart like yours. God, break down these idols. For some of you to come and lay idols down at the altar this morning, what I want to do is create a prayer space up here. We've done it before. I want you to come and I want you to pray in just a little bit when we sing. I want you to come to this altar. For those of you that need to, and you just say, here's an idol that I want to confess, Lord. I want to confess this idol. And I want to see Jesus as better. Or maybe it's your heart and you're like, God, I want to be a person of compassion. I want to be a person that's willing to sacrifice. But I don't want that right now. And I need you to do what I can't. This is what prayer is. God, you can, but I can't. Would you do in me what I can't do in myself? And this morning, we need to turn this into a place of prayer. We're asking God to make us neighborly people as we respond to the greatest neighbor, which is the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, Jesus himself, who showed compassion on us when we never deserved it. God, we come before you and we ask that you would do work in this place. God, your word, it's like a surgical instrument that pricks at our heart and pulls at things, and it can be uncomfortable, but God, it's necessary. And this morning, would you do things in our hearts? Would you do things in our lives? Would you make us people of compassion this morning? I pray that you would do work by the power of your Spirit in this place. Do it this morning for the sake of Jesus' name. And it's in his name and power we pray this, amen. As the Lord leads, you come. As they get ready to sing, you come and you just pray.